Hello everybody, my name is Swedish Djerf. Hello and welcome. In this episode, I connect my academic research and my political work with Samlade Demokrater to the public debate on welfare and employment. The discussion you're about to hear on my academic paper is a part of my larger initiative, The Project, where I examine how European regulatory systems and market structures deliberately limit sustainable growth. My focus is to show that when welfare is restricted instead of guaranteed, it doesn't create jobs, it creates exclusion. Structural scarcity becomes a political tool and people are blamed for conditions they cannot change. Let me explain something I've learned after more than 10 years of trying to survive inside this system. You're told that if you study, apply for jobs and stay motivated, everything will eventually work out. That's what I believe too. I followed every rule, took whatever job I could get, sometimes far below my competence, sometimes humiliating. But here's the truth, I did everything the system said would make me self-sufficient, and it still didn't work. When a person does all the right things and still falls through, it's not personal failure, it's system failure. It means the system's logic no longer matches reality. I call this structural scarcity. It's when the state demands that people work in a market that doesn't contain enough real jobs to hire them all. Welfare then stops being a right and becomes a punishment mechanism. You're not offered a solution. You're blamed for a mathematical impossibility. And that blame becomes a substitute for real policy. Instead of creating opportunities, governments shift responsibility back onto the citizens. Every time someone at the employment office says, "You haven't done enough," they're performing a ritual, keeping the illusion that control still exists. Meanwhile, local governments, corporations and consultants profit from the very scarcity they helped create. They sell programs, contracts, and housing at a premium because there aren't enough jobs, homes or alternatives. So, if you ever wonder why life keeps getting harder, even when you keep doing your best, it's not because you're lazy or broken, it's because you're living inside a structure that rewards limitation. And until we start questioning that structure, not the people inside it, nothing will change. The structural impossibility of welfare reduction as path to employment, an analytical inquiry into labour market deficits, legal contradictions and the commercialization of unemployment in Sweden. Author Swedish English, affiliation Nyhetseko Academia. Date October 2025. Abstract. This paper examines the recurrent political and media assertion that reducing social assistance, försörjningsstöd, will increase employment participation. Using economic data, legal analysis, and philosophical framework, it demonstrates that this premise collapses once confronted with structural labor market realities. The Swedish economy currently exhibits a quantitative and qualitative shortage of available jobs. Welfare recipients cannot be motivated into occupations that do not exist. Moreover, deregulated labor importation, the juridical asymmetry between citizens and corporate entities, and the consultant-driven monetization of unemployment further detach welfare policy from its stated purpose. Welfare thus becomes a diagnostic instrument, a litmus paper, revealing the ethical temperature of a society rather than a lever for behavioral correction. Introduction. The debate surrounding welfare reform in Sweden often revolves around the assertion that high social assistance discourages work. Recent editorials have portrayed families allegedly receiving 46,500 Swedish crowns per month, while declining employment opportunities. This narrative rests on two implicit assumptions. One, that suitable employment exists for everyone who currently receives support, and two, that the welfare system, rather than structural economic factors, is the main obstacle to labor participation. Both assumptions are empirically and conceptually unsound. Quantitative labor deficit, the missing 430,000 jobs. Statistical mismatch. According to statistics, Sweden's arbetskraftsundersökning, Q1 2025, Sweden had roughly 500,000 unemployed persons. During the same period, Ekonomifakta reported about 70,000 newly registered vacancies in August 2025. Even allowing for job turnover, that leaves a structural shortfall of approximately 430,000 positions between labor supply and demand. At least 4 out of 5 job seekers could not obtain work even if every vacancy were instantly filled. The idea that tightening welfare would move these individuals into employment therefore rests on an arithmetical impossibility rather than economic reasoning. Structural inertia. Moreover, the 70,000 postings are not net new jobs but routine replacement positions. Essentially the same volume Sweden maintains in normal or high growth years. They indicate rotation, not expansion. To achieve full employment, the country would need to create roughly 430,000 additional full-time equivalents beyond the existing stock. Under such conditions, cutting welfare to create work becomes a semantic contradiction. Scarcity cannot be solved by coercion. Economic incentives and the importation of cheap labor. Corporate substitution effect. Large firms operating within the EU single market framework can legally import lower wage labor from abroad. This transnational flexibility allows them to bypass the domestic wage floor and collective agreement obligations. Swedish citizens whose rights and protections are embedded in labor law and union contracts thereby become economically obsolete. They are both too costly and too informed to fit a deregulated model. The cost of legality. Citizens bound by the Swedish rättsstat, the rule of rights and obligations, carry predictable legal overhead, pensions, insurance, and due process protections. Imported labor, often employed through subcontractor chains, can be cycled without those obligations. Consequently, reducing welfare does not lead to Swedish employment. It merely lowers the domestic wage ceiling and expands dependence on precarious migrant labor. The state's attempt to discipline its own citizens economically thus accelerates the very deindustrialization it seeks to counter. Juridical philosophical dimension, welfare as society's lakmus paper. From charity to contract. Modern welfare is not a favor but a constitutional instrument ensuring a skälig levnadsnivå, reasonable standard of living. In legal philosophical terms, it transforms ethics into administration. The German jurist Otto von Djerf described such institutions as ethical organisms of the state. When welfare deteriorates, the organism reveals internal necrosis. The law still speaks of rights, yet the body politic withholds nourishment. the diagnostic function. Welfare expenditure therefore operates as a social diagnostic, not a moral hazard. Its sufficiency or deficiency measures how truthfully a society honors its own constitutional promises. In this sense, welfare functions as a litmus paper. When citizens fall below riksnorm, the indicator turns acidic. Attempts to reduce assistance in the absence of available work signal a regression from juridical reciprocity to coercive governance, from social contract to social threat. The commercialization of unemployment, administrative monetization. Sweden's unemployment apparatus has evolved into a semi-privatized economy in its own right. Arbetsförmedlingen, municipalities, and outsourced bemanningsbolag together channel billions of Swedish crowns annually through activation programs, consultant contracts, and temporary staffing schemes. Each unemployed person becomes a revenue unit rather than a subject of rehabilitation. The longer unemployment persists, the more income these intermediaries generate. Structural unemployment is thus economically productive for everyone except the unemployed. Absence of outcome accountability. Despite continuous funding, these programs rarely yield stable employment. Reports from the Riksrevisionen have repeatedly shown negligibly long-term job creation. The persistence of unemployment therefore functions as a guaranteed business model. It sustains bureaucratic and consultancy income streams while maintaining the rhetorical justification for disciplining welfare recipients. Deconstructing the 46,500 Swedish crown myth. Composition of the figure. The often cited 46,500 Swedish crowns per family includes rent, electricity, and child-related allowances. A 5-person household with a rent of 14,000 Swedish crowns, normal utilities, and riksnorm-based living costs reaches such totals easily. However, after fixed expensive disposable income per adult rarely exceeds 6,000 to 7,000 Swedish crowns. Those close to subsistence level. To equate gross household support with personal profit is category error. Behavioral misattribution. Framing such households as refusing to work imputes moral failure to economic impossibility. When 500,000 people compete for 70,000 vacancies, the decision not to work cannot exist in any casual sense. It is equivalent to excusing citizens of refusing gravity. The rhetoric substitutes psychology for structure, transforming statistical abstinence into moral blame. The feedback loop of structural failure. 1. Job scarcity produces dependency on welfare. 2. Welfare stigmatization legitimizes policy cuts. 3. Cuts reduce domestic demand and purchasing power. 4. Weakened demand suppresses job creation. 5. Administrative expansion around unemployment absorbs public funds that could have financed actual employment programs. The cycle thus feeds on itself. Each turn yields profits for consultants, savings for corporations, and losses for citizens. The ostensible goal, full employment, recedes proportionally to the rhetoric that claims to pursue it. Discussion. Policy contradiction. If welfare is cut while structural job scarcity persists, the state implicitly acknowledges that its own economic system cannot sustain universal employment. In that context, coercive welfare reform functions less as economic correction and more as symbolic purification, demonstrating fiscal virtue by disciplining the poor. Comparative perspective. OECD analyses show that countries maintaining robust welfare floors during downturns experience faster post-crisis recovery. Sweden's current trajectory, moralizing welfare while outsourcing employment mediation, mirrors the pre-2008 Anglo-Saxon model, where precarious labor expanded without eliminating poverty. Ethical implication. The philosophical reversal is complete. Citizens are no longer protected from market failure. They are redefined as its cause. In such regime, legality remains intact while justice dissolves. Welfare One's society's lakmus paper now records a pH so low that democratic tissue begins to corrode. In conclusion, the proposition that lowering welfare levels will increase employment is analytically untenable. It collapses under 4 observable realities. 1. Quantitative absence of jobs. About 500,000 unemployed competing for only 70,000 vacancies, a deficit of roughly 430,000 workplaces. 2. Corporate labor substitution. Transnational firms replace protected citizens with cheaper temporary labor. 3. Philosophical inversion of rights. Welfare has become a disciplinary tool rather than a guarantee of social reciprocity. 4. Institutional monetization of unemployment. Administrative bodies profit from the very condition they claim to resolve. Until these structural contradictions are addressed, welfare policy cannot serve as an instrument of labor activation. Cutting benefits in a job-deficient economy merely redistributes suffering while leaving production, taxation, and justice untouched. A society that punishes its citizens for the absence of work reveals not moral clarity but systemic dysfunction, precisely what its welfare system was designed to measure.